the man said. I haven't smiled since she passed. And Steve Harvey did something no one expected. The studio lights were bright, the audience was laughing, and the game was moving at its usual fast pace. But then, in the middle of a question, something shifted. A contestant answered with 6 words that stopped everything. Steve Harvey, the man who'd made millions laugh for 3 decades, froze mid-gesture. His smile disappeared. The joke he was about to tell never came. Instead, he did something that no producer expected, no script could have planned, and no one in that studio would ever forget. This is the story of the moment when a game show became something far more important. The moment when laughter gave way to something deeper. The moment when Steve Harvey reminded us all what it really means to be human. The Johnson family had driven 8 hours to get to the Family Feud studio. Mark Johnson, 47, stood at the center podium with his teenage daughter Emma on his left and his mother Patricia on his right. They'd applied to be on the show 6 months earlier, back when life was different. Back when there were 4 of them. Mark's wife, Sarah, had been the one who loved Family Feud. She'd watched it religiously every evening, calling out answers before the contestants could, laughing at Steve's reactions, nudging Mark and saying, "We should go on that show someday." It was her dream, her little escape after long days as a nurse. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, they said. She lasted 4. When the acceptance letter arrived 3 weeks after her funeral, Mark almost threw it away. But Emma found it. "Mom would want us to go," she said quietly. "She'd want us to do this for her." So here they were, standing under lights so bright they made Mark's eyes water, or maybe that was something else entirely. Steve Harvey stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. The first 2 rounds had gone smoothly. The Johnsons were good players, their answers solid, their teamwork evident. Steve did his usual routine, making faces at unexpected answers, riffing with the families, keeping the energy high. The audience laughed on cue. Everything was going exactly as it should. Then came the fast money round. Mark was alone at the podium, Emma and Patricia waiting backstage for their turn. Steve held the card, ready to fire off the first question with his trademark rapid-fire delivery. "All right, Mark, here we go. 5 questions, 20 seconds. Let's win this thing for your family." Steve's voice was upbeat, energetic. "First question. Name something that always makes you smile." It should have been an easy question. The kind of softball that starts fast money rounds with confidence. Birthday cake. Puppies. A good joke. Simple answers that come quick and keep the momentum going. Mark opened his mouth. Closed it. His jaw tightened. His eyes, which had been managing to stay dry all day, suddenly weren't. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I haven't smiled since she passed." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Steve's hand, which had been poised to hit the timer, slowly lowered. His expression, always so animated, went completely still. Around the studio, you could hear the absence of sound. No laughter. No anticipation. Just silence, heavy and absolute. Steve looked at Mark, really looked at him, and in that moment, the game show host disappeared. What remained was just a man, standing across from another man carrying a weight too heavy for any game show stage. "Hold on," Steve said softly to the production booth, his hand raised. "Just hold on a second. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." Behind the scenes, producers were frantically gesturing. They had a schedule to keep, commercial breaks to hit, a show to tape. But Steve Harvey wasn't looking at them. He stepped away from his mark, walked around the podium, and stood directly in front of Mark Johnson. "Talk to me," Steve said, his voice low enough that the audience had to lean forward to hear. "What's her name?" "Sarah." Mark's voice cracked on the syllable. "My wife." "Sarah. How long?" 3 months ago. "Pancreatic cancer." Mark wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. She's the one who loved this show. She's the reason we're here. She'd watch every day, and she'd always say—" His voice broke completely. "She'd always say that one day we'd be standing right here." But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Steve Harvey, the man known for his perfectly tailored suits and his carefully maintained composure, put both hands on Mark's shoulders. His own eyes were wet now. The audience, unsure of what to do, sat in complete silence. "Listen to me," Steve said, his voice firm but gentle. "I lost my father. I know that hole. I know how it feels like you're never going to breathe right again. But I also know something else." He paused, making sure Mark was looking at him. "She's watching this right now. You know that, right? Wherever she is, she's watching, and she's so proud of you for being here." Mark nodded, unable to speak. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, perfectly folded, and handed it to Mark. It was such a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. The handkerchief Sarah had wanted Mark to carry, just in case. The little piece of preparation for a moment like this that she'd never see but somehow knew would come. "Here's what we're going to do," Steve said, loud enough now for the whole studio to hear. "We're going to play this game. We're going to play it for Sarah. And every answer you give, every point you score, that's for her. You understand me?" Mark nodded again, wiping his face with the handkerchief. "But first," Steve turned to face the audience, "I need something from all of you." He pointed to the crowd. "Mark here is doing something incredibly brave. He's showing up. He's honoring his wife by being here even though every fiber of his being probably wanted to stay home today. So before we continue, I want everyone in this studio to stand up." The audience rose as one. "I want you to look at this man," Steve continued, his voice growing stronger. "And I want you to show him that he's not alone. That Sarah's love didn't end. That it's right here, in this room, in all of us." The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. It wasn't the usual game show applause, enthusiastic but impersonal. This was different. This was 200 people telling one man that they saw him, that they felt it too, that he didn't have to carry it alone. Mark Johnson, who hadn't cried in public since Sarah's funeral, who'd been holding it together for Emma and his mother, who'd driven 8 hours to honor his wife's dream, finally let himself break. And as he did, Steve Harvey pulled him into a hug. The cameras kept rolling. The producers stopped gesturing. Because everyone understood that what was happening on that stage was bigger than any game show. When Mark finally pulled back, Steve kept one hand on his shoulder. "You ready?" he asked. "Yeah," Mark said, his voice steadier now. "Yeah, I'm ready." "Then let's do this for Sarah." Steve walked back to his position, picked up the card, and looked at Mark with a small, genuine smile. "And Mark? I think you're about to find out that you can still smile. Maybe not like you used to, not yet. But you can smile again. I promise you that." The fast money round continued. Mark's answers weren't perfect, but they were solid. When Emma and Patricia came out for their turn, Steve told them what had happened. Emma hugged her father before taking her position. Patricia squeezed his hand. They played as a family, for a family, with a family. They didn't win the grand prize. They fell 30 points short. But when the final score was revealed, nobody in that audience cared about the money. They rose to their feet again, this time in a standing ovation that lasted so long producers had to extend the segment. Share and subscribe, make sure this story is never forgotten. But Steve Harvey wasn't done. As the family started to leave the stage, he called them back. "Hold on," he said. "One more thing." He took off his suit jacket, the beautiful navy blue jacket that probably cost more than the prize money they didn't win, and draped it over Mark's shoulders. "This is for you to keep," Steve said. "Not because you need a jacket, but because I want you to remember something. Every time you see this jacket, I want you to remember that today you showed up. You honored Sarah. You loved her so much that you did the hardest thing in the world, which is to keep living even when it feels impossible. That's not just strength, brother. That's love. And that jacket right there, that's proof that you're going to be okay." Mark looked at the jacket, then at Steve, then at his daughter and mother. And then, for the first time in 3 months, the corner of his mouth turned up. It wasn't a full smile. It wasn't the smile he'd had when Sarah was alive. But it was something. A beginning. The audience saw it. Emma saw it. Patricia saw it. And Steve Harvey, who'd spent 30 years making people laugh, smiled too. Not his TV smile, but something quieter, deeper, more real. After the show, Steve spent 20 minutes with the Johnson family in his dressing room. He talked about loss and healing. He shared his own stories of grief. He gave Mark his personal phone number. "You call me if you need to," he said. "Day or night. I mean that." 3 months later, Steve received a letter. It was from Emma Johnson. Inside was a photograph of her father wearing Steve's jacket at her graduation. He was smiling in the photo. A real smile. And with it a note. "Dear Mr. Harvey, my dad wanted me to send you this. He says to tell you that you were right. He can smile again. It's different now, but it's real. Thank you for showing up for him when he couldn't show up for himself. Thank you for seeing him. Thank you for the jacket. He wears it to every important occasion now. He calls it his remember to keep going jacket. Mom would have loved that. She would have loved you. We all do. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Emma, Mark, and Patricia Johnson." Steve Harvey framed that letter. It hangs in his office, next to all his awards and accolades. When people ask him about his proudest moment in television, he doesn't talk about ratings or Emmy nominations. He talks about a man who hadn't smiled in 3 months, a jacket that meant more than fabric, and the day a game show reminded everyone watching that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply be human. The episode aired 3 weeks later. It went viral within hours. Millions watched the moment Steve stopped the game. Thousands shared stories of their own losses, their own grief, their own moments when a stranger's kindness made all the difference. The segment was studied in communications classes, used in therapy sessions, played at grief counseling groups. But for Steve Harvey, the impact was more personal. He'd spent 3 decades in television, building a career on laughter and entertainment. He'd made people happy, given them escape, brought joy into living rooms across America. It was good work, important work. But that day with Mark Johnson taught him something deeper. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't laughter. It's permission. Permission to hurt. Permission to be broken. Permission to keep going anyway. And sometimes, just sometimes, that permission comes in the form of a navy blue jacket and a hug from a stranger who understands that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about standing back up, even when you don't know if you can. Steve still hosts Family Feud. He still makes jokes, still reacts with exaggerated surprise at unexpected answers, still brings energy and joy to every episode. But since that day, there's something different in how he connects with contestants. A deeper awareness. A willingness to let the game pause when life demands it. A recognition that sometimes, the most memorable moments happen when you're brave enough to step outside the script. The episode aired 3 weeks later. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times. Comments flooded in from people around the world, sharing their own stories of loss, their own moments when a stranger's kindness made the difference between drowning and breathing. A widower in Ohio wrote, "I lost my wife 2 years ago. I thought I was the only one who felt this way. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." A daughter in Texas shared, "My father hasn't been the same since Mom died. I'm sending him this video. Maybe he'll see that it's okay to still be here, still be hurting, still be trying." A therapist in California began showing the clip in grief counseling sessions. "Sometimes," she explained, "people need permission to feel what they're feeling." Steve Harvey gave Mark Johnson that permission. And in doing so, he gave it to millions of others. Steve Harvey received hundreds of letters after that episode. But it was Emma's photograph of her father in that navy blue jacket, smiling at her graduation, that he kept closest. Because that image proved something he'd always believed but rarely got to see, that showing up for someone in their darkest moment doesn't just help them survive. It helps them remember how to live. Mark Johnson still has the jacket. He wore it to his first volunteer shift at a cancer support center, where he now helps other families navigate the same nightmare he lived through. He wore it when he gave a eulogy at his best friend's funeral, finding words because Steve had shown him that acknowledging pain is the first step toward healing. He wears it when he needs to remember that healing isn't betrayal, that love doesn't end, and that sometimes, a stranger's kindness changes everything. The man said, "I haven't smiled since she passed." Steve Harvey gave him a jacket and showed the world what true humanity looks like. That's not television. That's legacy.